Hello, and welcome to the KCSA Mental Health Virtual Investor Conference. My name is Allison Sauce, and on behalf of KCSA Strategic Communications, as well as our co-host, OTC Markets Group, we're very pleased you have joined us for our next live presentation from REUN Neuroscience. Before I introduce our speaker, a few points to note. Please submit your questions in the question box to the left of the slides. If you are interested in scheduling a meeting with REUN, please click on the Meetings tab found on the left navigation bar. You will be able to view the company's availability and submit a meeting request. On a final note, all of today's presentations will be recorded and available for 24/7 replay. At this point, I am very pleased to welcome Greg Mays, President and CEO of REUN Neuroscience, which trades on the Nasdaq under the symbol REUN. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you, Allison. It's a pleasure to be here this morning, and thanks to the organizers for pulling this important meeting together and giving us an opportunity to tell you a little bit about REUN Neuroscience. Most listeners have probably not heard of REUN Neuroscience because we are a relatively new company that was first established on August 11th. We were previously part of the Field Trip family. Field Trip became known as REUN Neuroscience, where the Field Trip Discovery Unit became a standalone company developing a product called RE104 that had been recently launched earlier this year into phase 1 and is now in completing phase 1, and will have data to announce and report on in the first quarter of 2023. So great time to be learning about REUN as we embark on the coming phase 1 readout in early 2023, followed by the launch of a phase 2 program in 2023 as well. So good morning, everybody. Again, Greg Mays. A little bit about me. I am relatively new to REUN Neuroscience. I started at the end of September. I have been in the biotechnology industry for over 20 years. I started as an attorney, working through positions at large pharma, big and bigger biotech, where I ultimately switched to the business side 14 years ago following my company's sale, where I was a general counsel to Eli Lilly of ImClone Systems for $6.5 billion. This is my third CEO opportunity, and I am thrilled to be back in the brain. What do I mean? My greatest success in the biotechnology industry occurred in 2017 when I identified some interesting phase 1 proof of concept data in the epilepsy area, which is near and dear to my heart from both a personal perspective, as my oldest son was diagnosed 10 years ago with epilepsy. We took some epilepsy technology through a robust international phase 2B study that was backed by a $40 million Series A investment from TPG, Adage Capital, and Lumira Ventures. The output of the study at the end of 2019 was wildly positive, and we sold the company within 90 days of data in 2020 to UCB for a 6x investor return and $270 million. So it's great to be back in the brain, because the largest comorbidity associated with a disease state that is near and dear to my heart, epilepsy, the largest comorbidity is in fact depression and anxiety, and is in fact not seizure management, as many people may think. So that's a little bit about myself and why I was interested in choosing to come to REUN Neuroscience earlier this fall, because it does represent an area of passionate interest for me. That's number one. And it's an area of huge unmet medical need, as many of you know here on the call today. 25% of young Americans are in active mental health treatment, according to the CDC. That's just one of hundreds of statistics that support the fact that we are in troubled times in terms of people's mental health challenges, and we need new tools, ideas, and treatments to help fight back and bend the curve of rates of depression in the United States and, quite frankly, around the globe. Psychedelics is a second reason I wanted to join REUN Neuroscience, besides my personal connection to depression and anxiety. as well as the huge unmet medical need. But when you're looking for new and innovative ideas, clearly psychedelics are the closest thing and provide us as a society with the greatest opportunity to help become that new tool that we so desperately need in the battle against depression and anxiety. And then thirdly, why Reunion Neuroscience? There are approximately 33 publicly traded companies that are looking at developing treatments for mental health conditions using the psychedelic backbone as the key mechanism of action. So how do you size up all the different opportunities and all the different players in what is arguably a congested space? Well, for me, it was easy with respect to Reunion Neuroscience because we have significant intellectual property. Intellectual property is something that I am not entirely sure has been fully appreciated by the psychedelic community, physicians, key opinion leaders, and investors. And intellectual property is what is going to drive further investment into the psychedelic area and is what's going to ensure that companies like Reunion Neuroscience are placed in a position to maximize the opportunity of their psychedelic pipeline. So I'm hugely impressed, and I think it's important to recognize that Reunion Neuroscience has intellectual property, composition of matter patents issued by the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office out through 2041, which is important for investors who want to make sure that their investment is going into clinical development and research programs that can maximize the opportunity for the company and return significant multiples on their investment. And it's also significantly important as we look towards the future, as we develop compelling phase 2 data sets and programs and continue to make a difference in the area of depression and anxiety. We want to be able to put the company in a position where it can be partnered or acquired by companies that are able to further invest in, support, and resource phase 3 development and ultimately commercialization. Now going to turn to my slides with that introduction behind me and walk you through a little bit about Reunion Neuroscience. As I said earlier, Reunion Neuroscience is a recently new company that was established on August 11th. Our lead asset is RE104, which is a proprietary novel psychedelic serotonergic drug that's being developed ultimately in phase 2 for postpartum depression and potentially other psychedelic indications once we move forward with postpartum depression. As I mentioned, we are on the cusp of reporting out phase 1 data. That is actually a robust data set. It will be data from 32 subjects, and we'll have information from a wide range of data points, including the duration of the psychedelic experience and data that suggests that we have found the right dose that will drive a mystical effect level that puts the company in a position to predict efficacy in a phase 2 study. And of course, we will be looking at safety and tolerability across 4 dosing cohorts worth of data. I'm not going to dwell on slide 4. I want to keep moving and hopefully get to some good questions and the answer discussion amongst the participants. But suffice it to say, there is an urgent and unmet medical need in the area of mental health. We have not seen innovation in this space in 35 years since the advent of products like SSRIs and Prozac. They represent not only major unmet medical needs, but significant opportunities as well on the in terms of a commercial upside. And as you're all probably aware, the COVID-19 pandemic certainly increased the demand for mental health treatments. It's been well documented and identified that COVID increased the numbers of patients, referrals, and waiting lists in terms of people that desperately needed new treatments, as loneliness and disassociation with society and just general fears in general created a situation where we no longer can avoid the urgent and medical needs of people who are suffering with their life, their vision of their life, and the life around them. So why, in addition to just the census, do we need new opportunities in psychedelics? Well, because traditional antidepressants or SSRIs just aren't getting the job done. They are insufficient and unacceptable, and we need to provide psychiatrists with new tools for treatment. So on slide 6, you can see that basically the limitations of traditional antidepressants are several. They take a long time to metabolize, out till several weeks. Only 30% of the population actually responds to a first-line level treatment of an SSRI. The adverse event profile is unsatisfactory, provides for sexual dysfunction complications, weight gain, and the list goes on and on. We can do better. And ultimately, they also require long-term or continuous administration that can ultimately, in many cases, lead to a level of addiction with SSRIs. So psychedelics provide a really new opportunity, and this is our focus, serotonergic psychedelics. REUN Neuroscience is now a pure play biotech company developing psychedelics much like a traditional biopharmaceutical company. We've completed all the preclinical and pre-IND enabling toxicology work that will enable us to start studies in the United States in postpartum depression in 2023. We'll be reporting out in early 2023 exactly how we expect to do that in phase 2. But why are we so excited about serotonergic psychedelics? Because they have a fast onset of action. You generally see activity and effect within less than 24 hours. There are high initial response rates out to 70% of the patient population, and we're seeing durable efficacy with respect to the effect that the psychedelics are generating as they target the serotonin 2A receptor. Significantly, the adverse event profile is mostly acute and limited to the pharmacology of psychedelics, such as nausea or headache. Suffice it to say, since I've joined REUN Neuroscience 2.5 months ago, the one thing that's been most obvious to me and most striking has been the number of physicians, key opinion leaders, neurologists, psychiatrists, epileptologists, and even well-heeled and experienced and very smart institutional healthcare investors who have all joined me in the excitement and promise and opportunity of serotonergic psychedelics, because they do believe that based upon the data sets that they are seeing and that have now moved forward, that they are very confident that psychedelics can work, they can be safe, they can be efficacious, and we're actually also seeing an opportunity with the FDA to actually encourage the development of this type of mechanism of action for mental health conditions. So how do these serotonergic psychedelics work? From our perspective at REUN, there's actually 2 phases. There's an acute phase. That's the in-clinic phase where a patient would be monitored and would be administered subcutaneously RE104. In the first acute phase, we will see very rapid disruption of the traditional patterns of thinking and acute stimulation of the neural connectivity that allows for the providing of insights and release of depressive default networks. Downstream, we see durable effects emerging for the patient who has received psychedelic therapy. And that leads to neuroplasticity and changes in the neuronal structure that result in new and strengthened brain connectivity for the patient. This is how it works in terms of 2 phases. Logistically, we do not see it as psychotherapy. What we see it as a psychological support. And there's a preparation phase where we work the patient through in terms of what they can expect with their psychedelic experience. There's an exploration phase that is monitored to make sure the patient is kept safe throughout the period of the psychedelic experience, as well as an integration phase, which is after dosing, where the patient is able to report out what visions, thoughts, and other types of reflections they have on the psychedelic experience that can be used later on in their own psychiatric care and psychotherapy that occurs after the psychedelic experience, and is something that we actually believe can enhance the effect of the psychedelic administration. So what do we think? We think that there's ultimately a trailblazer in this area. Compass Pathways is developing COMP360, and last month, the New England Journal of Medicine clearly highlighted the advancements of psychedelics in the areas of depression and anxiety, and in the case of Compass Pathways, in particular, treatment-resistant depression. These are incredible, and we think that this data is encouraging for what we can achieve with RE104. Because RE104, as I will describe in a moment, is very similar but very different than psilocybin. But we do believe, based upon its chemical structure, we can achieve the types of results we saw in the New England Journal of Medicine. One result that we want to change or alter, and I will explain in just a moment, is that you'll see on this slide that single psilocybin administration was cited in the New England Journal of Medicine article as taking 6 to 8 hours. We believe that based upon the structure, design, and engineering of RE104, we can expect a much shorter psychedelic experience, much in the range of 3 to 4 hours. That is significant and we believe provides a meaningful advantage for patients, providers, and payers. So our mission at Reunion Neuroscience is to develop therapeutic solutions for underserved mental health conditions. I'm going to skip on slide 10 to the far right. We are what you would consider a second-generation novel serotonergic psychedelic. We believe it's important that we follow on the important promise and ideas of pioneers in the area, but we do believe that ultimately a shorter duration psychoactive state will be important, and we're able to establish that by leveraging a known chemical structure that improves the bioavailability of 4-hydroxy-DIPT. The shorter psychedelic activity state, coupled with stronger intellectual property, provides for a more meaningful second-generation opportunity in the field of development for mental health conditions leveraging the psychedelic mechanism of action. Now, let me tell you a little bit about the history of RE104. RE104 is built upon the 4-hydroxy-DIPT moiety. That product was identified by Dr. Alexander Shulgin, the godfather of MDMA, several decades ago. 4-hydroxy-DIPT was identified by Dr. Shulgin for its speed, intensity, and brevity. We identified it as a possible candidate to bring forward for clinical development, and our scientists took a very close look at it. As a result, we are now the only company in the world that's developing 4-hydroxy-DIPT. We were able to identify 4-hydroxy-DIPT and overcome the weaknesses of 4-hydroxy-DIPT, which were that it had poor solubility, poor stability, and poor bioavailability. We were able to accomplish this by putting a prodrug onto the 4-hydroxy-DIPT chemical structure. This was very significant. It also led to the creation of a new chemical entity, which has now led to the issuance by the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office of a composition of matter patent for RE104 that extends out to 2041 in its current timing. We do expect to extend the intellectual property life cycle of RE104 beyond 2041. So what do we like about 4-hydroxy-DIPT? Well, it has a pharmacological profile that is similar to psilocybin. As you look at slide 13, you can see how our receptor binding constants overlap 4-hydroxy-DMT, which is the prodrug of psilocybin, which is what generated the data that has now led to Compass Pathways bringing COMP360 into pivotal phase 3 trials and hopefully an approval someday. So we believe, based upon the structure of 4-hydroxy-DIPT and how it overlaps and covers the receptor areas covered by psilocybin in 4-hydroxy-DMT, that we can achieve similar levels of efficacy and safety. Now, we are different, though, a little bit than psilocybin, and it goes back to Dr. Shulgin. Dr. Shulgin thought was able to show that 4-hydroxy-DIPT has a rapid peak and then also washes out from the body very quickly. This rodent model does show the unique pharmacokinetics of 4-hydroxy-DIPT as it is embodied in our investigational product, RE104. We would hope to further establish this with our phase 1 data that we will be presenting in Q1 2023. So we're similar to psilocybin, and we think we can achieve similar levels of efficacy as psilocybin, but we think we can also achieve better product profile in terms of the length of the psychedelic experience. These similarities and differences led to the issuance again of our patent, which was issued earlier this year and is evidenced on slide 14. As I mentioned, we are on the cusp of going into clinical stage studies in phase 2 in the United States in 2023. In 2021, the REUN Neuroscience scientific team led by Dr. Nathan Bryson, who identified 4-hydroxy-DIPT and established the ability of us to drug 4-hydroxy-DIPT, completed all the phase 1 CMC and preclinical pharmacology and toxicology work necessary to move forward into the clinic in the United States. So now RE104 is set to deliver a Q1 2023 readout of its data. This is not a garden variety phase 1 study. It has up to 6 cohorts of 8 psychedelic experienced healthy volunteer patients that were tested with the product in Australia. The first 4 cohorts, which defines the first analysis of this study, has been fully enrolled and completed, and the quality control and auditing process for that data is now underway. Each cohort has been reviewed before it goes to a higher level of dosage by a safety review committee. And as I mentioned earlier, their endpoints for the study include safety and tolerability, pharmacokinetics, the duration of, which means the duration of the psychedelic experience, as well as exploratory endpoints that will help us select a dose for phase 2 by looking at drug effect questionnaires and mystical effect questionnaires that will make sure we're achieving the right level of hallucination and psychedelic experience without putting the patient at risk from a safety perspective. So where do we go beyond the first quarter when we report our data and the rollout of RE104? We will go into a study in phase 2 study in postpartum depression. We think that there are no psychedelic companies in the United States that are developing a psychedelic for postpartum depression in this disease state. There's only one approved product there, and there's a huge unmet medical need. We wanted to first explore this area in a smaller niche patient population, which will allow for a smaller trial, shorter duration of the trial, and the ability to complete this study and have compelling data in postpartum depression by the end of 2024. It's still a sizable market of 4 billion patients, and again, the unmet medical need is very large. In fact, the CDC estimates that women who die in the first year following childbirth, the leading cause is mental health. 80% of the women die of a mental health related cause, with suicide and drug overdose being the largest areas for concern. As you will see on slide 19, we believe that RE104 offers a really good opportunity in postpartum depression to highlight the ability of this product to succeed in this area of depression, which could be ultimately transcended into other indications, including other mental health conditions, addictions, or other areas that we are currently potentially exploring. We think this is an episodic condition that will allow for single dose, a short psychoactive state, and fast relief for the women who suffer from postpartum depression. Importantly, the product will allow for women to return to breastfeeding within 24 to 48 hours based upon the half-life and pharmacokinetic profile that we are seeing for RE104. And as I've mentioned before, we think the ability of our product to have significant intellectual property protection allows us and or others to more fulsomely invest in this product and its opportunity. So a little bit about our regulatory and clinical development timeline. As you can see on this slide, in 2022, we are completing our phase 1 study. In 2023, we will be a full-fledged biopharmaceutical company pursuing phase 2 programs in both postpartum depression and in an indication that is to be chosen in the future based upon our fundraising, our ability to resource a second indication, as well as our strategic assessment as to the best area for us to pursue with a product with our profile and intellectual property life cycle. What you'll see here on the next slide is our study schema for the postpartum depression study. It's a standard 1-to-1 study format of RE104 versus placebo in approximately 40 patients, looking for differences as a primary endpoint in the HAM-D17 score from baseline at 24 hours in duration. I would be remiss if I did not touch upon here in my last couple of minutes the RE200 series. This is a preclinical discovery program, but we hope to identify a lead candidate for our RE200 series in 2023. Basically, the RE200 series, we believe, may offer advantages over the RE100 series in that we may have a safer product in terms of its ability to, or safer in terms of an ability to chronically dose the product, as well as potentially lessen the hallucinogenic effect of the product, which might allow ultimately for in-home administration. Again, this is the future of Reunion Neuroscience. We spend 90% of our time moving our product through the clinic, and so we can fully maximize the opportunity of RE104. Since coming on board, I've been able to fill out and build around the team that Dr. Nathan Bryson established prior to Reunion Neuroscience at Field Trip Health. I've hired Ed Smith as our Chief Financial Officer, Dr. Aviva Asnis-Alabozic as our Head of Medical Affairs, Curtis Weber as our General Counsel, and Beatrix Taylor leads our clinical operations and regulatory area. We have a strong set of clinical advisors as well as scientific advisors that are assisting the company in the development of our clinical protocols and helping us to identify new areas of exploration for a second indication in phase 2. And of course, we have a board of directors that is led by my predecessor, Joseph De Moral, as well as Dr. Dieter Weinen, who's the former chairman and CEO of Bayer Pharmaceuticals. So with that, I'm going to turn to the Q&A session, and I do see that there is one question that has been asked, and we can go to the questions here in the queue. One of the questions that came in is, you mentioned strong intellectual property protection, but when I Google for glutarate DMT, other papers show up. So how is your product different? Our product is different because we have a new prodrug that's been put onto the chemical structure of 4-hydroxy-DIPT that is new, novel, and has never been recognized before by the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. That highly differentiates for us, and we think allows us to leverage what Dr. Shulgin originally thought was that the structure for 4-hydroxy-DIPT could allow for a strong yet brief psychedelic experience. Another question came in about what are your key milestones for 2023. Our key milestones are 3 things. 1, report out solid phase 1 data from the 32 patients worth of data I spoke about before. Number 2, open up our investigational new drug application with the FDA for a phase 2 study in postpartum depression. And in the second half of 2023, begin to dose patients in that postpartum phase 2, that phase 2 study. Another question came in is, what was the strategy for spinning out Field Trip? I think the answer to that is very sort of straightforward. Field Trip runs psychedelic clinics that focus on ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. Very important in the area of mental health, but it's a fee-for-service, out-of-pocket, cash-generating business that is very different from a biopharmaceutical company that's developing a new and novel molecule for postpartum depression and other indications in the mental health sector. So when you have two very different companies and pursuing, and then trying to attract investors, there was an investor clash, and the investor bases did not necessarily match up. And also, quite frankly, the board recognized the success that Field Trip Discovery was achieving by being able to identify a new and novel compound that it could take into the clinic and would be exiting its first phase of the clinic in 2022, which we've done. So it made a lot of sense. Field Trip Health, the clinic's business, is now being operated under a wholly separate company called Field Trip Health and Wellness. So I note that I'm at the end of my time, operator, and with that, I'd like to close down the session. I want to thank everyone who joined today for their interest in learning more about Reunion Neuroscience and the power of psychedelic, serotonergic psychedelics that may bring new treatment options to patients such as RE104